Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your cybersecurity series. My name is Vlad and I'm here to help you discover more and engage in cybersecurity. Today, this is our episode 3 on Stuxnet, which is the incredible and highly sophisticated attack against Iranian uranium enrichment facilities. And while in the previous video we talked about the technical aspects and how the hackers managed to infiltrate the Natanz facilities and disrupt the operations, today I really want to focus on the attribution of the hack. As we discussed in the previous videos about Carbonac, about the French election campaign, sometimes it's quite hard to exactly pinpoint who was behind a sophisticated operation like this one. And today I will share with you some of the rumors, some of the elements that we have on Stuxnet. So, starting with a short reminder on the brilliancy and everything that was implemented and done during this attack, basically, we need to understand that whoever was behind the hack, they managed to go undetected, and not only for a few weeks or few months. The attack lasted over years, in between 2006, 2008, and again later until 2010. So they managed to breach the facilities twice, as we discussed in the previous video. First, by using USB infected devices, and we have discussed a bit about that and the technicalities. And the second time by changing gears, switching techniques, and rather focusing on the subcontractors who go home, connect to their own software, to their own infrastructures, but then come back to the facilities, come back to the plant, will plug in their laptop, and the malware will spread into the protected facilities. They used at least 6 top vulnerabilities, and 4 of them at the time were completely unheard of, meaning that there were no patches, no protection. They were not known from the public, they were not known from the editors. So it's really a huge effort into building a successful malware. Then they perfectly also navigated the complex industrial protocols. They knew everything they had to about Siemens and how the software were working together, how the instructions were going through from the centrifuge into the PLCs, into the Siemens software, so the controlling software. All of that was really with a high level of precision in order to make sure that not only the operations are shut down, but they are rather disrupted slightly. So the spinning velocity was increased or decreased in order to damage, as we discussed last time, the different components. But that was really so subtle that even in the control room, they had no view, no clear understanding of what was going on. On top of that, as we discussed, it was not only about breaching the Iranian facilities, but also about breaching other companies which provide certain certificates in order to make sure that some of the updates were stamped as legitimate. And finally, that's the last piece of the puzzle. They even managed to disrupt some customer services support. So we are talking about email addresses or hotlines that were disrupted at the moment where Stuxnet became viral and escaped, let's say, the facilities of the plant. It went on internet due to a mistake, and then it started replicate itself. But even though the attack became public, they wanted to push more and make sure that the remediation and the recovery would last as long as possible. So, having said all of that, who could be behind such a hack? So, if you look at Stuxnet report, so Stuxnet dossier, which was published in 2010 by Symantec, the famous security company who did all of the analysis on the malware and really understanding what are the different pieces, what are the different modules really doing. Basically, in their conclusion that I am sharing here, they say that basically this is a great complexity, something that would require significant resources to develop. For example, Microsoft has also at the time, back in 2010, 2012, made similar comments saying that altogether they believe that 10,000 man days of development were necessary to develop such a malware. So that would be like a team of 5, a team of 10 people working during years in order to pull that off. They said that few attackers will be capable of producing a similar threat to such an extent that they would not expect mass threats of similar sophistication or similar breadth. So that would be Symantec's own conclusion. But what they say also is that Stuxnet has highlighted direct attack attempts on critical infrastructure are possible and not just a theory, it's not just a movie plot line. That's their word directly into the conclusion. But as you see, this is something that was only at the time in the realm of fantasies, something that could perhaps theoretically be done, but there was no evidence of a cyber weapon being used to breach critical infrastructures. They also say that the real world implications of Stuxnet are beyond any threat that we have seen in the past. And despite the challenge, they hope to never see such a threat again. And that's how I started this series of video on Stuxnet. I told you that there are very few significant events within the history of cybersecurity, which is 25, 30 years old. But Stuxnet was really groundbreaking. And it's not just from me, you can take it also from Symantec. So, who was behind it? Today, it's almost a worldwide consensus. Everybody strongly believes that this was something from the US, a joint program between the US and Israel. I will talk more about how we know it and what we really have as evidence to pinpoint that. The idea is that there were a lot of investigations. One of them, it's a really good article on the New York Times that was published. They were also it inspired books, movies, all of it, and that's the difficulty comes from confidential, secret or top secret information, informants within the surveillance office of, for example, Barack Obama here, so within the security room. Basically, this is a program that apparently started with George W. Bush, so even before Obama. But that's kind of the worldwide consensus today, even though it was never publicly acknowledged either by Israel or the US or any other country or any other party to this date. So what's inside this article? Basically, you will learn that there was a code name for this operation, apparently Olympic Games, hence the cover page. It started in 2006 under President Bush, as I said, and then handed over to President Obama. And that's quite interesting because even though they were from different political parties, when it came to defending the country and having a foreign policy, both of them kind of agreed on many items, including the idea that a cyber weapon could be the way forward into the Middle East. The objective, as stated, or at least as reported in those articles, was that it first delay the uranium enrichment and also propose some sort of alternative and not having boots on the ground, not doing different strikes or basically starting a war in the Middle East. They had been in Iraq in 2003. Now they were looking at different opportunities, different methods. In terms of actors, heavily sponsored by the CIA, by the NSA, also, let's say, their equivalent within Israel. So that's the unit 8200 that apparently, or should I say allegedly, provided a lot of elements on Nathan's facilities, the blueprints, how the different elements were interconnected with each other in order for the hack to be as successful as possible. Something that also may have your attention is that in the previous video, we discussed how hard it is to really understand industrial protocols and making sure that the orders that the malware is giving are properly understood. Because if you are making mistakes, then maybe you are going to shut down a critical component of the plant and you will be immediately detected. But there, in the case of Stuxnet, everything was precise. They had a really deep understanding of the communications protocols. And what's interesting is that in these investigations, they made the link between also seized components from Libya. So in 2003, Libya was led by the Colonel Muammar el-Gaddafi, and he gave up his nuclear weapons program. So in 2003, and around the same time, the US and the UK, through a joint operation, they seized several cargo ships containing centrifuges, so P1 centrifuge. And basically, those centrifuges were then brought back to the US, and apparently, they served as a real situation, real life testing lab for that malware. So basically, they tested their own malware on a fake plant made of captured materials in order to anticipate the real scenario in Natanz. So that's coming from the investigation in the New York Times, which I found quite compelling, and honestly, that would make sense given the level of sophistication that we see. Some other elements that are not part of the investigation, but that you can also find on Wikipedia and diverse articles. So it's not only about the, let's say, confidential discussions in between officials, because nothing has been released. As I said, nothing has been confirmed. However, when looking back at our episode 8, when I showed you how today the researchers are trying to make connections in between group of hackers and attacks, because some malware or some infrastructures, they share similarities. Well, that's the case here. This malware, Stuxnet, is reusing a lot of critical vulnerabilities that we see also in other malwares. For example, Flame, which is another computer virus, and this virus is really specific to a organized crime organization, the Equation Group. And this Equation Group is, let's say, known to be close to the US government. They share a lot of components, they share a lot of techniques. So this was released later, so within the years 2015, 2019. There were several assessments from security researchers comparing the techniques and the artifacts within those malware, and they concluded that it was really likely that Equation Group at some point participated into the development of Stuxnet, which again makes the connection with the US. There were also some references apparently to Stuxnet within a short video that was shown in a very private circle during the General Gabi Ashkenazi retirement party. So he was the former head of Israel Defense Force. So again, there was no public announcement or public statement, but interviews with some guests that attended the party claimed that Stuxnet was part of the achievements or unofficial achievements of his career, which also would draw the line to Israel. There are some questions today whether or not Germany was also involved in the campaign. Some people believe that it would be impossible, even with a secondary infrastructure, as we discussed, brought back from Libya, to come up with such a knowledge on the Siemens technology and hardware. So perhaps some engineers from Siemens or from the German authorities contributed to the development also of the malware. What we know more recently, and that's why also Stuxnet is a fascinating story, because even 10 years after the facts, after the events, we still learn about it as, let's say, the documents also declassify. So we know since 2019 that it was not just USBs that were dropped on a parking lot, but the Netherlands had an active mall in Iran, and this mall was able to plug the infected USB, or at least have another employee plug the USB key during the first attack scenario that we discussed in the previous video. So there is also this theory that they called it Olympic Games because you have the 5 wheels, and they would perhaps represent 5 different countries. So the US, Israel, maybe Germany, maybe the Netherlands, and a fifth country, unknown which one it could be. Some obviously say the UK, some say it could be France. This is, I mean, that's a theory that you will find, but there is no facts or no report really mentioning a 5 country alliance. Not that they not in open sources that I have seen, but that's just maybe some easy way to remember the code name. Otherwise, I personally find it already quite striking. So that's it for today. I hope you learned a bit about this Operation Olympic Games and sometimes how difficult it can be, again, to attribute an attack to a particular group of people, a particular group of researchers. Uh, but as I said, today the overall overwhelming consensus is that this was part of a joint task force between US and Israel. In the next video, we will discuss about the legacy of Stuxnet, everything that has happened since. I mean, not everything, but what are the main trends and what do we see on the market? How the lessons from Stuxnet are still being used in today's event. But that's for another video. Thank you for your time and see you soon.